warm welcome to Leaders of Tomorrow Masterclass, a digital-first platform where we're focusing on issues that matter to you. If it matters to you, we've got it covered right here on the Masterclass. This is the first of 20 such masterclasses that we're going to be doing over the course of Season 9. And before we start today's masterclass, I want to take a brief second to thank each of you for your support and for joining us for the past 8 years and for joining us today on this masterclass. With that, let me quickly talk about what we are doing today. We are focusing on the budget. What are you as an audience member, what are you as a viewer expecting and hoping to see by way of budgetary announcement on the 1st of February? All of that being front and center today. Let me welcome in our panelists on that note. All of them very well-known faces, don't need much of an introduction. First up, joining us is Abhi Barua, Chief Economist and Executive Vice President at HDFC Bank. We have Radhika Gupta, MD and CEO of Edelweiss Asset Management Company, and Mohandas Pai, Chairman of Manipal Global Education, also very famously known for being the Chief Financial Officer at Infosys.
Whether you're an SME, a startup, or a fresh graduate ready to start, managing money and people with steady growth is the success mantra for any business. As the COVID-19 carnage pushes economic slowdown, expectations stand high from the upcoming budget to boost the sentiments of business. Get the bird's eye view on the changing digital landscape and policies that matter to you the most. Introducing Leaders of Tomorrow Masterclass, a digital-first platform with a never-before coming together of India's sharpest minds to advise and inspire you on the different facets of life. If it matters to you, we've got it covered. Stay ahead with the masters of business.
Radhika, gentlemen, thank you very much for taking the time to join us here on this masterclass. We are looking at an advance, estimates as far as the GDP is concerned of a degrowth of 7.7%. That's for FY21 versus a growth of 4.2% for FY20. If this is the scenario that we are working with as far as this new year is concerned and as far as the macro economy is concerned, what should someone do? What should the government do? More importantly, when we are looking at sustained growth that's perhaps going to stay for the next 5 years, 10 years, etc. Radhika, maybe I could come to you first.
Thanks, Sunanda, and thank you for having me. I think, in the number of budget years I've seen, even for the government that is making decisions today, this is probably one of the trickiest years you're coming into. It's a time when growth has, of course, been very, very challenging, as you've noted, but there also has been some degree of bounce back in the economy. And I think if you look at some of the indicators that have come in over the last couple of months, whether it's mobility, steel, GST revenues, which had dipped coming back, you feel that things are coming back, and I believe, probably another year of support from the government to get the economy back on track is what you need. And in that sense, it has to be a growth-oriented budget. So I think clearly go for growth has to be the outcome, and I think this government has done a very good job as far as fiscal discipline is concerned. However, it is going to be a challenging thing to do because you also have significantly less room to play with things like taxation. So I think in short form, for me, providing a booster to growth is the big thing. I think global economies all over the world are doing that and really focusing on spurring consumption. Because if you get consumption right, investment will come in later.
Okay, Mr. Pai?
Well, I think Radhika said, we are coming off a very bad year. I mean, last quarter has been good. This quarter, January, February, March is expected to be very good too. So we are starting the next financial year with a growth quarter. And there are two things government needs to do to kickstart. One is to invest hugely in infrastructure. Because in the economy, there are two things that can make the economy grow: capital expenditure and consumption. And for capital expenditure, you need to invest in infrastructure. Hopefully, the government will increase infrastructure by the central government by 40-50% next year. That's what they plan to do. That's what we are told. And increased infrastructure will create more jobs, downstream purchases, etc. And like Radhika said, when increased consumption happens, capacity utilization rise. So I think, they have to invest in infrastructure. And second, they have to make sure that they invest in the right areas to tackle the structural challenges of India. 43% of our people depend on agriculture, per capita income 55,000 rupees, In industry is 1,65,000, in services 2,25,000. 43% has to come down. So we have to create infrastructure in the smaller towns so that labor-intensive industries can come up there, and that will create jobs. So jobs are the primary, output that should come out of greater investment. Then invest in human capital, invest in education, just to make sure that we come off COVID very well and people can live healthy lives, become more productive.
Yeah, I broadly concur with whatever Mr. Pai and Radhika had to say, but I just wanted to sound a couple of notes of caution. One is that we must remember that despite the traction in the economy, which is quite remarkable given the fact that we degrew or contracted by 24% in the first quarter, we are doing very well. But the fact is that there has been contraction, which means that despite the traction in the economy, we go back to the levels of GDP at the end of 2019 only by the third quarter of this year. So we've lost quite a bit, and we need to we go back to, in a sense, square one towards the third quarter. The second thing, which I think a lot of economists are talking about, not just in the Indian context, but also globally, is this business of the K-shaped recovery. That this recovery will be led by certain sectors, by certain income groups, and some will be left behind. So the growth could potentially be very, very unequal. And I think some measures need to be put in place to tackle that. And this inequality could be, across size classes of firms. For instance, the SME sector could be left behind, whereas the bigger enterprises could power on. So I think there are these additional challenges that need to be taken on board in constructing the budget. And I think there is still a case for providing, fiscal support to both household segments as well as firms that need it. And I think there is maybe investment will lead to higher incomes and consumption growth. Maybe it'll have to partly work that way, where you sort of drive the investment engine forward and have a spin-off in terms of higher consumption demand.
Fair enough. All points taken. I do want to come back and talk about what perhaps the government should do when it comes to boosting consumer sentiment. Mr. Pai, for instance, he was talking about outlays as far as infrastructure is concerned. That's one of the fastest, if I can really call it that, when it comes to ensuring that there are more jobs coming back. Consumer sentiment is positive. Figures though showing that government expenditure and government consumption likely to be lower at about 5.8% for FY21 compared to 11.8% in FY20. We're talking about the K-shaped recovery, whatever may be the model of recovery we're looking at, what is that one thing perhaps that will make consumers want to continue spending again? Mr. Pai, maybe you could take that.
No, I think the one thing that will make people spend again, and let's remember, out of the 1.38 billion people, 300 million are the critical consumers. Not everybody can shift the economy. Let's be careful, because the balance will be people who are in a survival mode, living on very little, and you can't do much to change what they do. Why don't you give them a nice tax break? For example, make the income tax slab easier. 0 to 5 lakhs, no tax. 5 to 10, 10%, 10 to 15, 20%, above 15, 30%, doing away with the ATC exemptions. Because that will allow much more cash to be in the hand. It's not going to alter your tax collection, because 85,000 crores a deduction in the ATC, and that could go away, but it will send a very positive move. Second is, reduce the capital gains tax on unlisted companies. Because today in the startup community where I work, we have a tax of 20% plus 35%, the 37%, that is 28%. That's very, very high. We need investment in startups. We need exist in startup. We need more human capital. Do something like that, which will be dramatic. So do these things for the feel-good factor, because improving infrastructure is going to take time. Anything you do takes time. So the immediate thing will be, for the 300 million people, 8 crore taxpayers, just shift the slabs. And that's not going to cost you too much money. Nirmala Sitharaman did a very complicated 7-slab thing last year, which is very wrong. You give with one hand, take away with one hand, it makes no difference. People are disappointed. You got to get the mood up. You got to get the feel-good factor. And for that, something dramatic like that will make a big difference.
Okay, speaking of dramatic, I do want to discuss PLI at this point, the production-linked incentives, the big announcement made by the government to help domestic manufacturing. I want to talk specifically for MSMEs. MSMEs saying they want some sort of an extension to ensure that small businesses, SMEs and MSMEs can also participate really in the PLI scheme. Essentially, a lower budget allocation also will perhaps then come under the ambit of PLI. Open to Abhi, Radhika, would you want to comment on what the government should do to ensure that small businesses are also seeing really the benefit of the announcement on PLI? Abhi?
But there is a sort of a design to the structure of the PLI, which the government communicated right after it announced it, is that really the bet is on the bigger firms benefiting from that and there being second round effects on tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 vendors, which are really the SMEs who will gain from it. So I see some logic in that structure. But I see it as I said, as an evolving process, and the government being open to tweaking it or changing it even radically wherever there is a need. And if the SMEs are in a position to contribute significantly in a particular segment, I don't think the government is entirely close to it.
Radhika?
I would tend to agree, Abhik. I think PLI has been a success in the areas that it has launched in, things like mobile phones, etc. I mean, those tended to be lower capex in nature. And while there is openness to expanding PLI, and I definitely think it should be, I think the fundamental basis of PLI was that the government wanted players with scale in the PLI game, where you are really doing export substitution. And really, if you look at the players that have participated in PLI, they have been some of the bigger names. So I think a separate set, they could be secondary benefits, as he said, but the purpose of PLI was really players with scale. There's no point, there is some merit in perhaps setting up a secondary version of it for MSME, SME, but it's a different game.
Let me talk at this point about what was needed on education. This edition of the Leaders of Tomorrow, in the 9th edition, we're focusing also on the youth of India. Less than 3% of the allocation in the GDP presently goes towards education. Would you like to see that changing in, perhaps the budget that we see on the 1st of February? Open to the three of you, but Mr. Pai, I'll let you have the first stab at it.
Well, Sumanta, my view is very simple. There are two things that need to be done, three things in higher education. One, put that new education policy in place. The government has approved it, Prime Minister seconded it. Hopefully it will take time. There are many low-hanging fruits which you can do. We can talk about it later. Second, expand the scholarship program for people from the economically deprived sections to go to college. Today, 65% of young people are educated by the private sector. That means government funding is only 35% in government schools and colleges. And many of the people in lower strata don't have money to pay the fees. And private sector has to work on fees. So create a national scholarship program for, let's say, 10 lakh young people. Pay them, create a scholarship program at 25,000-30,000 rupees a year so that they get some kind of scholarship. Last year, Prime Minister Modi gave a reservation to the economically, challenged people in the forward communities. That will be good. The second thing that has to be done is create a 5,000 crore non-lapsable pool of money for the National Research Foundation. The tragedy of India is we have 36.5 million, 3.6 crore young people in college, 26.5% gross enrollment rate in 18 to 23. 90 lakh people graduate out of the colleges every year. And they're all coming into college, all communities except Muslims, but Muslims are improving in the last 7 years. You'll be very surprised some of the figures I have about all communities doing extremely well. But the key thing is you must allow them to come into colleges, but create jobs by expanding the economy, but create this National Research Foundation. So the top of the pyramid, we can create more PhDs and masters over the next 7 to 8 years, create more intellectual capital, more innovation to take India up. You asked a question about high quality jobs. How will the high quality jobs come if there's no R&D? How will the high quality jobs come if there's no innovation? For example, in computer science, we graduate only 500 PhDs in computer science for a country which claims to be a software superpower. It's ridiculous. Data scientists, we almost don't have any, right? We got to invest in those sectors. And I think that's why these two things are important to do. Because we have the education capacity. You can't improve quality in 1 year. It'll take time, but we have to empower them and we have to create investment in research.
Okay, speaking of quality, of course, India continues to rank very poorly on the PISA scale, Mr. Pai. Open to the three of you. We have a first question coming in from our audience member. Speaking of the National Education Policy 2020, this question is coming to us from Rajan S. It's a great move that the government has done. Reforms in the education space have been needed for a long time now, but his question is, as far as infrastructure for education is concerned in India, what needs to be done to fix it urgently, both physical infrastructure and digital infrastructure? Open to the three of you.
One of the problems that I find with the new education policy, and this is a fairly radical departure from the philosophy of it, is this idea of a 4-year multidisciplinary program. I simply, coming to the question of infrastructure and resources needed, I simply don't think, despite the potential entry of foreign players and so forth, we don't have the infrastructure to have this kind of a liberal arts kind of structure where, people are exposed to different domains. I think for an economy like India, the emphasis should be on specialization right from the beginning, and a focused push on creating infrastructure to provide the specialized education and training. And the other thing that I've been a supporter of is the apprenticeship model. And I think that can work very well, because not only do we need high quality jobs, we also need, given the size of our labor pool, we also need sort of mid to low quality jobs, and we also need our welders, our construction workers, and they need a certain amount of training. So I think the apprenticeship model is something that perhaps needs to be pushed forward.
I think Abhik made a very good point that you ultimately need to increase the employability of the youth that you're skilling. I think we see it in the services industry, in multiple industries. You're producing engineers, but they're not finding jobs. You're producing CFA graduates, and they're not finding job opportunities. So what are you doing in terms of skill development for the educated population? What are you doing in terms of internships? What are you doing in terms of apprenticeships to make sure that everybody that you put skilling into is actually employable?
Sunanda, there are two things that has to be done. First, you've got to create more jobs. You've got to skill people better, but where are the jobs? So the economy has to grow. That's the key. Remember, in the IT industry, we were told there are no engineers. We all used to train 150,000 engineers in our campuses every year. We spent $2.5–3 billion, made it happen. McKinsey said there will be a shortage of 500,000 engineers by 2010. There were no shortages because we created all of them. So industry can do it. But the big challenge is the digital divide. We got 26 crore young people in school. If you take class 6 and above, they could be maybe 15 crores. All right. Now we need to give them a digital device. Why don't we have a plan that for 10 crore young children, we give them a digital device of 10,000 rupees, and it will cost maybe 50,000 crores a year, 100,000 crores for 2 years, and that can be given with rich multimedia content. It can be a 50-50 program from the central government and the state government. There's enough money.
Sure. Not too long ago, we were speaking with V. Vaidyanathan of IDFC First Bank, and one of the things that he, pointed out to us is, why don't we have a progressive tax structure? So I want to talk taxation for the education industry. Online education at this point being taxed at 18%. Would this panel like to see that changing? How would you like to see it changing?
So I would suggest the government, center and state exempt all online education, where you're educating young people, skilling young people. From the GST, it may not cost more than 5,000 crores, because the quantum of revenues is very small. Look at all the digital unicorns, barring Byju, which has got an income of 2,500 crores. Others are earning peanuts. They're hardly earning anything. The valuation is very, very high. So I think we must do it for the next 10 years and say all digital education, and you can define it, come out with the norms, will be free of GST. And that will lower the cost, because today we need digital dissemination. We need access. That's the most critical challenge that India is facing.
Another thing that's of huge relevance to the youth, of course, is jobs, and where are the jobs? I want to refer to data. The average Indian company employs about 2.8 people compared to China, which employs between 51 to 2,000 people. So that's the average size of an Indian enterprise. There seem to be too many tiny enterprises and perhaps not enough larger sized, SMEs or MSMEs. If the government needs to ensure that there's more jobs really coming back, what needs to be done? Open to the three of you.
So 25 million babies a year for the last 30 years. So every year, for the next 15 years, 25 million young people enter the job workforce or attain the age of 21, out of which 15 million require jobs. We are producing about 9 to 10 million jobs, and we don't have 5 million jobs more, out of which 9 to 10 million, maybe 2 to 3 million are good jobs, the others are all indifferent jobs. I mean, the data is very clear. And we have a problem with job for women. We're seeing more women graduate and come out in the northern states like UP, Bihar, everywhere else. And you'll be happy to know that women have got a higher GR than men last year. So our women are going to dominate this decade, but we got to create jobs for them. And women are not willing to migrate down south, because in the south, there are more jobs than graduates. And the males come down south, the women don't come. So I think for us, we have to create jobs in the right place, the right kind of jobs. Even the economy grows, women will not get jobs. Because, they're all coming out in the north. There are more women in the north coming out in the workforce than the south, and the jobs in the south, because south is more developed. So it has to be seen very differently with a different strategy.
Sure. I want to take in a viewer query at this point. If Radhika Navik, if you want to take in this question as well. Deepak Bhatia is sending us this question to say, what are the skills which I will require in the post-pandemic recession period that we're looking at, and perhaps then what the government should do when we're talking skilling, reskilling, etc. Open to all three of you. Radhika, if you might want to take that on first.
Yeah, and I'll make a couple of comments about jobs, and then I'll take that question. I think the pandemic has accelerated a trend in terms of youth finding difficulty to get, jobs. And I think if you look at employment data or unemployment data, it tells one story. But I think youth unemployment data tells a much starker and scarier story. And it's a topic I'm very passionate about, because I think your youth demographic dividend then becomes a big liability. I think there are a couple of things that you can do. One is that some countries are now giving incentives to employers to start retaining and adding people, and that is, rather than putting money in the hands of the consumer, that is another way to try and spur jobs, because a lot of employers are getting more efficient, more people are cutting back, that's a fact. The second is you can handhold companies and execute infra projects as the government, and more infrastructure spending, construction spending, that can pick up, employment. The third thing I would say is that Mr. Pai made a great comment about women, and women's participation in the workforce in any case is coming down. It's probably 27% and coming down. But I think work from home and the whole trend that has moved towards digital and work from home gives us a chance to rethink how we can use women with whatever their personal constraints are and use them in the workforce more effectively. So I wanted to make those points. I think in terms of skills for the future, which was the question that was asked, I think the post-COVID world will definitely require a different set of skill sets for the youth. A lot of the hard engineering and a lot of the traditional jobs are victims of AI and automation. So I think skill sets that are more managerial, skill sets that require a lot more creativity, skill sets that are a lot more interdisciplinary, these are definitely things that will help the youth when it comes to job creation.
All right, on that note, I want to thank all of you who've joined us today. I want to thank our panelists, Radhika Abhik, Mohandas Pai. Thank you so much for joining us here on this first masterclass on the leaders of tomorrow.
Why can't you reduce the PF for the employee contribution from 12% to say 5%? After that, you can increase it. ESI, why didn't you make it, the employee's contribution to 0.5%, maybe 2%, they reduced it. So reduce the friction for business so people get more in hand.